Hi, I'm Sandra Nomoto, and I took Rachel Ricketts Spiritual Activism 101 course yesterday, which was June 7th, 2020. Today is June 8th, and she asked us to share on social media what we learned from the course. And so instead of doing a blog or some sort of written form, which I'm usually comfortable with, I thought I'd hop on a video and speak to that, because one of the things that I learned is that we need to hear more voices of people of color, and I'm a woman of color. So even though this is uncomfortable, here I am. I learned a lot. I learned a lot of facts. I think I still have a way to go in terms of experiential learning, because I feel quite fortunate to have been raised with a lot of Asians in my community, and especially the elementary school that I went to had a lot of Filipino Canadians. And so when I was growing up, I was really lucky not to have experienced any sort of racial discrimination or trauma to that effect. But one of the things I learned is how we perpetuate perpetuate whiteness and prioritizing whiteness. And this is definitely something that I took some time to reflect on, because I grew up in a household where one of my parents wanted to teach me the Tagalog dialect, and the other parent wanted to perpetuate Canadianism. And so I grew up actually not wanting to learn Tagalog, because it seemed really hard to learn another language, and I was already pretty good speaking and writing English. And so I decided not to learn, even though later on, as I became an adult, I wanted to learn. And it's probably not too late, but that's how I personally perpetuated whiteness growing up. I also got a lot of comments, both from Filipino adults and white adults, about my skin tone, and the fact that dark skin tone was not ideal. So I got complimented a lot on sort of the tan or the caramel color of my skin, even though my skin isn't white. That's something that I remember growing up. And so subconsciously, of course, I didn't want to get very tanned in the summer. I wanted to stay light. I wanted to stay the skin that I had. So those are just some of the reflections that I personally had about how I prioritized whiteness when I was growing up. And the second big thing that I learned was about how people of color need to heal from our own racialized trauma. So again, I was very lucky not to experience any form of racial discrimination. There's only one time that I can really count where I did feel that in environment. But one thing that I've been thinking a lot about since digging into my own ancestry a couple of years ago is the actual history of the Philippines. It's really interesting. So around the same time in the 16th century, when the transatlantic slave trade was happening from Africa to the US, the Philippines was colonized by Spain. That is how they got the name of the country. And even some of my ancestors on both sides are Spanish. My maiden name is Garcia. And so I have a history of that colonization, in which a lot of my ancestors were probably Spanish and were responsible for wiping out a lot of the indigenous culture that was that belonged to the indigenous Filipinos. So there's that. And then in the 20th century, the Philippines was colonized again by Americans, and that is where the whiteness and the prioritization of whiteness comes from. That's why English is so prevalent in the Philippines. Most people know how to speak it, as well as the Tagalog or their own dialect. And westernization, again, light skin is preferred there. And of course, Christianity is rampant. It's the main religion that's practiced in the culture. So I don't have an answer for that. It's just something that I'm grappling with. Just the fact that there isn't a lot of record in terms of the indigenous Filipino culture, and that's really sad. And maybe that can change once we are able to visit the country, get more documentation, share more online, support more of the organizations that are trying to keep that culture. One that I've learned about is the Center for Babaylan Studies, or Babaylan, I think is the right pronunciation, studies in the US. So yeah, that's what I have to say. That's what I learned. A lot of stuff to think about. So thank you so much to Rachel Ricketts for putting on the course. I did also register for Spiritual Activism 102. So really excited to dig into that. I highly recommend 101. It's 2 hours plus time of your own reflection. So it really doesn't take a lot of time at all, and very, very reasonably priced. I also want to shout out to Madeline Sloan for recommending the course and being an ally. So thanks so much for listening, and hope to see you in a future video.